This episode of Deep Dive Unknown could be
our best yet.
Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine this scene. It's 1976, right? And pictures start showing up everywhere. Pictures of this ape walking fully upright, bald head, features that just seemed, well, off. Not quite chimp-like.
Yeah, really striking images.
His name was Oliver. And people immediately started wondering, could this be it? Could this be actual proof of a human-chimpanzee hybrid?
It really captured the public imagination, didn't it? I mean, the idea itself is so provocative. And Oliver seemed, at least on the surface, like maybe he was the first real evidence.
And the media just went wild. You had headlines calling him the missing link, even Bigfoot. He was suddenly this international sensation.
Absolutely. And the science back then, it just wasn't equipped to give a clear answer. Was he something totally new or just a very, very unusual chimp?
That ambiguity, that lack of a definitive answer just fueled all kinds of speculation. And then Oliver kind of faded from the headlines, seemed to vanish for a while.
Right, but that wasn't the end of the story. Not by a long shot.
No. So we've done a deep dive into the source material here. We're looking at accounts from, the trainers who first raised him, the lawyers who got tangled up in his life, scientists who tried to figure him out, reporters covered the whole saga. And our mission today is basically to peel back all those layers. We want to explore the science, the speculation he sparked, follow his, honestly, quite difficult life journey, and then get to what modern science, the latest testing finally revealed about who or what Oliver really was.
So what was the truth behind the mystery of Oliver? Let's dive in. Okay, so it all starts back in 1960. Oliver arrives in the U.S. from Africa, just a baby chimp brought over by these animal trainers, Frank and Janet Berger.
And right from the get-go, the Bergers noticed things were different about him. And later, others, like psychology professor Gordon Gallup, saw it too. He just didn't seem like other chimps.
What kind of differences are we talking about? Well, physically, there was the obvious bald head. His head was smaller, too, compared to typical chimps, less of a protruding jaw, and these sort of pointed ears instead of round ones. Even his smell was apparently different.
And behaviorally.
Yeah, that was maybe even more striking. The sources say he just wasn't interested in other chimps. Like he actively avoided them and seemed to genuinely prefer being around humans.
But the big one, the thing everyone points to, was the walking, right?
Oh, absolutely. His habitual upright walking, that was the showstopper. Chimps can walk on two legs for short bursts, but Oliver apparently did it routinely. It was his normal way of getting around.
And Janet Berger, she tried to teach other chimps to do it, like Chippy.
Yeah, she did. And the sources say Chippy would take a few steps, maybe, then immediately drop back onto all fours. Couldn't sustain it.
And later, Wally Sweat, who ran the sanctuary where Oliver ended up, he noticed something specific about the way Oliver walked, too.
Right. Sweat pointed out that chimps trained to walk upright tend to do it kind of hunched over, with bent knees. But Oliver walked more erect, locking his knees straight. Sweat was convinced this wasn't just some trained behavior.
So it wasn't just a trick he learned.
That's what Sweat argued, yeah. And it wasn't just the walking. Janet Berger told stories about him, like coming inside the house, sitting down to watch TV with them.
Seriously?
Yeah, or, mimicking things like washing his hands. She even gave him a cigar once, and he puffed on it. She described him as understanding simple chores, looking where she pointed. She basically said he was like a little person.
Wow. Okay, you can see how the hybrid idea started to take hold. This collection of unusual traits, the upright walk, these human-like anecdotes.
It painted a really compelling picture.
Okay.
But there was a turning point for the burgers. Something happened that made keeping him impossible for them.
Right. He reached adolescence, basically.
Exactly. Around age 16, Oliver hit sexual maturity, and he started directing sexual attention towards Janet Berger.
That's problematic.
Very. And it escalated. There was an incident where he actually mounted her quite aggressively. After that, they saw him as a real problem, understandably, and Janet started looking for someone else to take him.
And that's how his picture landed in a magazine.
Precisely. Which is where a New York attorney named Michael Miller saw it.
What was his reaction?
Miller described himself as just blown away,
Yeah.
speechless. He said he just felt this immediate, overwhelming need to buy Oliver.
And wasn't there someone else interested too?
Yeah, a guy named Vincent Pace.
Yeah.
Miller ended up having to outbid him, paid $8,000 for Oliver back in 1976, which was a lot of money then. Left Pace apparently heartbroken.
So Miller, this Manhattan lawyer, now owns this very unusual ape. What does he do? He can't exactly bring him to his apartment?
No, definitely not. So initially, Oliver stayed with the burgers. Miller tried to keep the whole thing quiet, but, news like that,
Yeah.
it leaked.
How did it get out?
A journalist got wind of it somehow and basically cornered Miller. Said he'd blast the story out on the UPI wire service unless Miller gave him an exclusive.
Wow. So the story broke big time.
Oh, yeah. Miller said the very next morning, his office building was swarmed with press. Reporters shouting questions like, is he a Bigfoot? Or has science created a Frankenstein monster?
Good grief. That really shows you the kind of frenzy surrounding him.
It does. And that media attention led to some strange opportunities.
Wow.
Oliver actually made an appearance at the Explorers Club annual dinner in New York.
The Explorers Club, really?
Yep. Caused a huge sensation. Frank Berger presented him, pointed out his small head again, emphasizing how different he looked.
And then came the trip to Japan.
Right. For a TV special called Oliver, Man or Ape. Miller apparently hoped it would be a serious scientific investigation.
But
it quickly veered towards entertainment. Footage of Oliver supposedly sitting in a plane seat, dressed up in a kimono at a traditional inn for the cameras. That kind of thing.
So more spectacle than science.
It leaned that way, yeah. Although the Japanese special did include some attempts at science. They did a center of gravity test.
And what did that show?
Well, the report claimed it suggested he was more human than chimp in terms of balance. But the really big one was the chromosome count. Everyone was waiting for that.
The definitive answer, right? Humans have 46, chimps have 48. What did they find?
This is where it gets really murky and, frankly, fueled the whole mystery even more.
How so?
The TV show reported that Oliver had 47 chromosomes. Exactly halfway between human and chimp. Perfect hybrid number, right?
Wow, so he was a hybrid.
Whoa, hold on. That was the headline grabber. But the crucial detail, the one often lost in the noise, was in the full results.
Okay.
Out of 40 cells they managed to analyze, 38 showed 48 chromosomes, the normal chimp number.
38 out of 40.
Yep. Only 2 cells showed 47. And the Japanese doctors themselves apparently attributed those two odd results to a probable human error or maybe a damaged cell sample.
So the overwhelming evidence was 48, clearly chimp. But they reported the 47.
They reported the 47 finding, and that's what the public latched onto. It kept the hybrid idea alive and kicking, even though the bulk of the data said otherwise. It's a classic case of, sensationalism over scientific rigor.
Man, that's frustrating. And things got even weirder, didn't they? With some kind of press conference scandal.
Yeah, it got truly bizarre. There was a report that came out of a press conference suggesting a Japanese actress was going to have sex with Oliver on live TV for science, supposedly.
What? You cannot be serious.
Completely serious. It was an outrageous claim. Miller ended up suing over it and eventually got a published apology. But it just shows how out of control the whole Oliver circus had become.
You can see why Miller might have started regretting getting involved, an attorney dealing with that.
He said as much later on.
Yeah.
He reflected that he regretted ever meeting Oliver. He realized it was kind of destiny they'd have to part ways. Keeping Oliver just wasn't practical for him, especially with all that chaos.
So Oliver triggers this huge public reaction, this media storm, and it really forces this fundamental question out into the open. Could a human-chimp hybrid even exist? Is it scientifically possible?
Exactly. Oliver, whether he was one or not, made people take that question seriously. And we do know that hybrids between different species can happen, usually in captivity, sometimes in the wild under odd circumstances. The liger is probably the most famous example.
Right, the lion-tiger cross.
Yeah. Dr. Bhagavan, who breeds them, uses them as proof that two distinct species can produce offspring if brought together, even if they'd never meet naturally.
And ligers are fascinating creatures themselves, aren't they? Huge, for one thing.
Yeah, enormous, much bigger than either parent species. The theory is that certain growth-inhibiting genes that would normally be passed down are absent in that specific lion-tiger cross, so they just keep growing.
Wow.
And they show mixed traits, too. Like, they inherit the tiger's love of water, which lions don't share. So it proves the genetics mix and express in observable ways.
Okay, so if lions and tigers can do it, what about us and chimps? We always hear we're like 99% genetically identical.
That's the figure, yeah. At least 99% of our basic biochemistry is shared. And based on that closeness, one scientist in the source material actually said he'd be surprised if humans and chimps couldn't hybridize.
Surprised that they couldn't. That's a strong statement.
It is. But there's usually a biological safeguard, right? Most hybrids aren't fertile.
Like mules. Horse plus donkey equals mule, but mules can't reproduce.
Exactly. Hybrid sterility. It's often seen as nature's way of keeping species distinct, preventing them from just blending back together over generations.
Which leads to a really mind-bending question. If somehow a human-chimp hybrid was fertile, what would that even mean? Would it challenge the whole idea of us being separate species?
It absolutely would throw our neat classifications into question. And this isn't just science fiction anymore. The sources suggest the actual lab technology needed to try and create such a hybrid has been around for quite some time, probably since the mid-90s or even earlier.
And there have been rumors, allegations of actual attempts, right? Though we should stress these are unconfirmed.
Very much unconfirmed, yeah. But persistent stories. There's one about China in 1967.
What's the story there?
The allegation is that scientists fertilized a female chimp with human sperm, that she became pregnant, maybe for about 3 months. But then the lab was supposedly destroyed during political unrest, ending the experiment. No proof, just a story that circulates.
And wasn't there a U.S.-based rumor, too?
Yes, Professor Gordon Gallup mentioned hearing it from an old professor of his, a story about the York's Primate Center back in the 1920s.
The 1920s.
Yeah. The rumor claims they artificially inseminated a female chimp, got a live birth, but then allegedly euthanized the infant within days and covered the whole thing up.
But the Institute denies this.
Completely denies it ever happened. So again, it's firmly in the realm of rumor and speculation, but the fact these stories exist shows how long people have been thinking about this possibility.
So those specific hybrid stories are unproven. But experiments have been done that show you can mix biological components across species lines, right?
Oh, definitely. Dr. Jose Sibeli's work in 1998 is a key example. He took a cow egg, removed its nucleus, its main genetic material, and inserted human DNA, like from a skin cell.
Okay.
Now, the cow's mitochondrial DNA, that's the DNA in the cell's energy factories, inherited only from the mother that stayed behind. It was still bovine.
Ah, okay, so it wasn't purely human.
Right. That's where the controversy and apparently some jokes about cowboys came from. But the significant thing was the human DNA activated within that cow egg. The egg started dividing as if it had been fertilized.
So it worked on a cellular level.
It did. Sibeli himself speculated that if it had been allowed to develop, theoretically, it could have become something like 99% Sibeli's twin brother and 1% cow. It demonstrated the potential to combine functional genetic elements from very different species.
And that potential, that capability, inevitably bumps up against ethics and law, like that professor who tried to patent a human-chimp hybrid.
Stuart Newman. Yeah, that was a fascinating move. He wasn't actually trying to create one.
No. Then why apply for a patent?
He did it deliberately to challenge U.S. patent law, which allows patents on living things. But more than that, he wanted to force a public conversation about the implications, about science potentially getting too close to home, as he put it.
Kind of a provocative protest using the system itself.
Exactly. And interestingly, the patent office rejected his application. Their reasoning was too human.
Too human to be patented. Wow.
Right. He appealed, of course.
Yeah.
But Newman's point was that scientists themselves need to be part of this conversation to warn society when maybe we're going too far technologically before we actually do it. He stressed the need for rules, for public awareness.
Because the sheer possibility throws up massive questions, doesn't it? Moral, ethical, social, religious, political, all of it.
Huge questions. There's an anecdote in the sources about someone asking a judge, hypothetically, how many human genes a monkey would need to get human rights in court.
How do you even answer that?
Well, the judge's reported response wasn't about a number of genes. It was more like, it would depend. If the right genetic changes, maybe The right 1.1%, as they put it, were made to make the animal legally more human than animal. It just highlights how unprepared our existing frameworks are for something like this.
Okay, so while all this speculation and ethical debate is swirling around the idea of hybrids, what's happening to the actual Oliver? After Michael Miller, the lawyer, bowed out, his life took some rough turns, didn't it?
It really did. It became quite a difficult journey for him. Miller donated him to a wild animal park out in California.
Okay, that sounds all right.
Well, the park went bankrupt. So Oliver ended up being shuffled between different trainers, different facilities. For quite a long stretch, he basically vanished from public view altogether.
And rumors started.
Yeah, rumors that he ended up in a circus somewhere, or worse, sold into laboratory research. No one really knew where he was for a long time.
But remember Vincent Pace? The guy Miller outbid way back when.
Ah, yes, the heartbroken bidder. He hadn't forgotten Oliver.
No. And years later, about 20 years actually, he came into some money. And what did he want to do?
Find Oliver. That became his mission. But it wasn't easy. Trying to track down one specific chimpanzee after 2 decades, multiple owners, the trail was cold.
But he kept at it.
He did. And eventually, he found him.
Where was he?
The reality was pretty grim, actually. Oliver was at a place called the Buckshire Corporation, a research facility in Pennsylvania, only about 2.5 hours from where Pace lived.
A research lab? So the rumors were partly true?
Well, he was at a research lab, but the good news, relatively speaking, was that Buckshire apparently hadn't used him in any invasive experiments. The bad news was he'd been kept there for 9 years.
9 years? In what kind of conditions?
In a small cage.
Yeah.
Sources say about 5 feet by 7 feet. For 9 solid years.
Oh, that's just brutal, especially for an animal that had known human interaction watching TV.
It's a stark contrast, isn't it?
Sure.
Just highlights the vulnerability of animals like him. But Pace found him, and that led to his rescue in 1996.
How did the rescue happen?
Pace enlisted the help of Wally Sweat, the man who ran the primarily primates sanctuary down in Texas. Together, they arranged for Oliver's release from Buckshire.
And when Oliver arrived at the sanctuary, after all that time,
Wally Sweat said Oliver walked off the transport truck on 2 legs?
still walking upright after 9 years in a cage.
Apparently so. For Sweat, that was the confirmation. This was the legendary Oliver. He also noted Oliver still had those distinct features, the smaller head, the pointed ears, the flat nose matching all the old descriptions.
That arrival must have been quite something. And wasn't Oliver part of a larger group retired then?
Yes, that was actually a landmark event. Oliver and 11 other chimps were retired from Buckshire to primarily primates. It was the first time chimpanzees had ever been moved from a lab environment to a dedicated sanctuary for retirement. The goal was just to give them a decent quality of life.
So Oliver finally found a safe haven for his later years.
He did. He lived out his life at the sanctuary. By then, he was getting old, of course. Around 42, he started losing his eyesight, developed arthritis. He didn't really walk upright anymore in his final years.
But the mystery still lingered, didn't it?
For Wally Sweat, absolutely. He still felt Oliver was unique, special. And with Oliver aging, Sweat decided it was time. He wanted a definitive answer, using the best modern science available while Oliver was still alive.
So he commissioned new genetic tests.
Yeah, described as the most extensive genetic studies ever undertaken on Oliver. This is going to be the final word.
Okay, moment of truth. What did the advanced DNA testing show?
The results were clear, conclusive. They counted his chromosomes again, with much better technology this time,
Well,
48. Oliver had 48 chromosomes, the normal standard number for a chimpanzee.
So definitively, absolutely not a hybrid.
Correct. After all the decades of speculation, the human-Z mystery was solved. Oliver was biologically a chimpanzee.
Case closed on the hybrid theory. But did the tests reveal anything else? Anything about why he might have been so different?
Yes, they did. And this is really interesting. While confirming he was pan-troglodyte, a chimpanzee, the detailed genetic analysis showed he wasn't like the common West African chimps that make up, the vast majority of chimps in the U.S.
So he was genetically distinct from them.
Yeah. Specifically, his mitochondrial DNA, remember, that's passed down the maternal line, indicated he likely belonged to a rare subspecies found in Central Africa.
A rare subspecies.
Apparently so. At the time these tests were done, that particular subspecies might have only represented something like 2% of the entire U.S. captive chimp population.
Ah, okay. So being from a rare subspecies could potentially explain some of his unusual physical traits, maybe even behavioral ones, compared to the West African chimps people were mostly familiar with.
That's the strong implication, yes. It provides a biological basis for his perceived differences without resorting to the hybrid theory. The core mystery, what species is he, was solved. But it left these other fascinating questions.
Like, was he just an extreme example of that subspecies? Was he a mutation or something else?
Or, as some speculated, maybe, just maybe, he represented something incredibly rare, like a throwback. A kind of living fossil echoing an earlier stage in ape evolution when upright walking was perhaps more common or being experimented with.
Wow.
But without finding another chimp quite like Oliver, he remains in many ways unique, even within his own species.
It sounds like his life was incredibly challenging, constantly being seen as other, passed around, confined.
It really was. And, there was a sense of relief expressed in the sources when the tests confirmed he wasn't a hybrid.
Relief. Why?
Because people imagine the state of a true hybrid, caught between species, potentially with conflicting instincts, maybe suffering physically or mentally. They imagined it could be a horrible state, a life of misery and limbo. Maybe being a unique, rare chimp, even with his difficult life, was preferable to that unknown.
That's a sobering thought. So Oliver wasn't the hybrid, but his story, his very existence, it forced everyone to think about the possibility, didn't it? And the consequences.
Absolutely. He became this focal point for confronting those really difficult scientific and ethical questions head on. Even though he wasn't the thing people speculated about, he made the speculation real and urgent.
Questions like, how would we treat such a being? Cage or cradle, animal research subject, or something deserving rights.
Exactly. And if it were possible for humans and chimps to interbreed, even in a lab, what does that say about the justification for using chimps in research? It deepens the ethical complexities around our relationship with our closest relatives.
It really connects to bigger ideas, too, about evolution, where humans fit, what human even means when you see chimps using tools, having culture, sharing so much DNA with us.
Yeah. Even knowing Oliver was just a chimpanzee, a very rare and unusual one, but still a chimp, he doesn't lose his significance. He remains, as the sources say, a very unique creature, still a bit of a mystery, part of the unknown. His story vividly illustrated how blurry those lines between us and other great apes can feel.
So wrapping up this deep dive, the headline finding is clear. Oliver, genetically tested, was a chimpanzee. A rare Central African subspecies, yes, but 100% chimp, not a human hybrid. That decades-long mystery is finally put to bed.
Right. But as we've explored, his story goes so much deeper than just settling that one question. Oliver's life, his uniqueness, really pushed people, scientists, the public ethicists, to wrestle with some fundamental ideas about science, about species, about ethics, about ourselves.
His journey, while obviously extreme and unique, kind of holds up a mirror, doesn't it? It makes you think about how we classify life.
Thanks for watching, everyone.
Especially now
It's
with
much
genetic tech
appreciated.
advancing so
Love
fast.
from Team DDU.
What are the limits of scientific ambition, or should there be limits? And what responsibilities do we have when we gain this kind of knowledge and power?
It leaves us with a really potent thought to chew on, I think. As we learn more about genetics, as we observe more complex behaviors in apes that mirror our own, those lines between human and other apes keep getting fuzzier, don't they?
Yeah.
So how might our definitions, our very concepts of species, maybe even personhood, need to evolve in the future?
Yeah.
Oliver's story, in a way, is a powerful prompt to keep asking that question.
Thanks as always for watching today, and if you like our videos, please don't forget to click on the like button and comment in the comments section, and if you already haven't done so, why not subscribe? It is completely free.